have iron deficiencies around here, but maybe magnesium or potassium deficiencies. In general, when it comes to making foliar sprays, I'll give you a couple rules of thumb. One rule of thumb is that you always, a 2% concentration is generally considered to be safe. So if you're going to be taking some iron sulfate or some potassium sulfate in water, take a little pint jar of water, put a couple tablespoons of potassium sulfate in. Potassium sulfate is a soluble form of, it's a soluble salt, and put a lid on it and shake it up. And when you can't get any more to dissolve in that water, you've got a saturated solution. Take a quarter cup of that and put it in a gallon of water. That's a 2% solution. And you can use that as a foliar spray to test with. A quart jar, a pint jar, doesn't really matter. You don't need that much. As much as you keep putting it in, a tablespoon at a time until it doesn't, and shake it up until it doesn't dissolve anymore. You do the same thing with salt. You put salt in until it doesn't dissolve anymore, and you've got a saturated solution. That's as much as the water can hold.
And use a quarter of a cup to a gallon?
A quarter cup of a concentrate to a gallon is generally considered to be a safe quantity. I will repeat this over and over again. If you're ever using a salt, in this case, anything that dissolves in water is a salt. If you're ever using a salt, you want to always buffer it with an organic compound.
We have something great that we use for this. It's called Soluplex. It's 37%
Yeah.
carbon, and I've done a lot of research with it. You actually put it in the water before you dissolve the salt
Yeah.
or the fertilizer, and it holds it, and it goes right through the leaf, and it's really great food for microbes.
Yeah, there's various products out there that you can use. Some you can purchase, some you can make. Whether you're using something really sophisticated like that, or you're going to be using a, humates or biochar or sugar or molasses. Anything that's a carbon source will buffer the salts and prevent burning from happening. I'm going to give you all kinds of ways to do this yourself, and then I'll tell you also that for those people who are like myself that mean well but don't follow through very well, there are a lot of products on the market you can purchase which don't cost very much that you can have on hand. You've got your ready-made magnesium one, you've got your ready-made potassium one, you've got your ready-made calcium one, you've got your ready-made phosphorus one, you've got your ready-made trace elements one, you've got your ready-made, all of them mixed up together, and it really saves a lot of hassle. And these people who are making these things are generally much better at it than we are. Not always necessarily a good idea, but it is absolutely an option for people. When it comes to applying foliar sprays, the general rule of thumb is do not do it when the sun is shining. Generally, the best time to apply a foliar spray is when the birds are singing, which is 4:30 in the morning or 7 o'clock in the evening. Generally, 7 o'clock in the evening is when I get around to it, even though I think 4:30 in the morning is a better time to do it. Depending on what's in your foliar spray, if you apply foliar sprays in the middle of the day, you can have them on a hot sunny day. Whatever you apply, the water will evaporate and you can burn the leaf, depending on what's in it. So, in the late afternoon when the sun's on its way down, dew is beginning to set. Whatever you spray on the leaf surface is probably going to be there. It's going to be mixing with the dew. There's going to be plenty of time for that to be taken into the leaf. The general concept on foliar sprays has been that they are taken in by the stomata. There's these little holes, pores on the bottom of the leaf generally, and those stomata are more likely to be open at dawn and dusk, and when the birds are singing, you can make stomata open by playing recordings of birdsong. I don't necessarily subscribe to the idea that they're being taken in by the stomata. I think that they're actually digested by the people living on the leaf surface, who are then feeding them to the plant. So I know this is not necessarily common, but my understanding is that these things are actually they're being eaten by the what's called the foliar community, people on the phytoplain, and they are fed sugars by the plant just as much as the people living on the root surface are fed sugars by the plant. In many cases, nitrogen fixers and things like that are up there on the leaf surface. All right, so generally a couple of points there. Leaf shape, shorter, wider leaves correlates with a higher productive potential and stockier plants. Longer, skinnier leaves are generally not the signs we're looking for. People may have noticed this on tomato plants. I keep going back to tomato plants. I'm not sure why, except generally people know tomato plants and they don't know other plants. But you'll find oftentimes a big, broad, stocky kind of leaf at the bottom of the plant and these little skinny leaves at the top of the plant. Anybody seen that, noticed that? Right? Right? It's the same plant And you can still see at the bottom of the plant these big, broad, thick leaves often, and these, the top of the plant, these little skinny ones. Right? That is not what should happen. That is not what should happen. The leaves should be the same throughout. They should be big and broad throughout the plant. And as the new leaves come out and they change their shape, that is symptoms of imbalances occurring. Right? When you know how to read the leaf and read the shape, you'll understand, okay, oh, potassium coming up. Look at these leaves. They're different than these leaves. If you go out in the middle of the summer, you can read the past 4 weeks or the past 2 months in the plant, each layer of leaves. If you look at, broccoli, a bed of broccoli or a bed of cauliflower or anything like that, you can see at this third leaf stage, it was wet and this happened. And look at all these leaves at this fourth leaf stage are all full of holes, but the fifth leaf stage are all fine. You can think back about what the weather's been like, and you can see how the plant responded to it, and you can really read the history of the season in the layers of leaves in the plant if you look that way. It's really interesting when you start to see things in this kind of a manner. It's really interesting.
The exception would be mature forest trees, though, where you have larger solar panel leaves on the top that are trying to capture more light, or. Right?
Do you have larger leaves necessarily on the top of the plant?
I think in many cases, oaks or like tulip tree would be a great local example.
They have smaller leaves at the bottom of the tree than the top.
I think, or I might be getting that confused.
I know in the under
Typically, like the
canopy
saplings
on
will
new
have
growth
bigger
trees.
leaves on the bottom of the forest, so like leaves.
Usually, the bigger leaves are at the bottom, and
Yeah,
that
you gotta just switch it
and that
around.
correlates with a boron deficiency.
Okay.
You may notice this on zucchini plants or cucumber plants. Ever seen a cucumber plant or zucchini plant that has a big elephant ears at the bottom of the plant, and as you go farther and farther up the plant, they get smaller and smaller? Cucumbers? Ever seen that? Winter squash? Winter squash, right? They vine nicely. What's that?
That's a boron.
It's called a calcium deficiency, which is oftentimes caused by a boron deficiency. We'll talk about that in a minute. But you should see generally the same leaf size across the plant. And the broader and the thicker the leaf, the better. The shinier the leaf, the darker green the leaf, the darker green the sap, the better. The question is teasing out what it is that's causing it to be not thick or not broad or not dark green. That's the question, is how do you tease this out? Leaf density, plants highly loaded with leaves have a higher productive capacity. Leaf sap color, we talked about that. Darker color means more chlorophyll. More chlorophyll means more sugar being manufactured. Magnesium, boron, and potassium associated with this. So we can experiment with this. This is a Lutz?
Chard,
It's chard?
It's chard.
Okay. So we can experiment with magnesium, boron, and potassium with this leaf and spraying onto this leaf and seeing if any of those affect the plant sap color. When you begin, these are skills that are difficult to teach and that come through experience. And so I really have to emphasize, okay, I got my little toolbox out. I got some basic ballparks of how to play with this. Let me go out and experiment. Some people need to do that sort of cause and effect experimentation. Other people are willing to use intuition or dowsing or kinesiology or other intuitives. There's many ways to figure this kind of stuff out. You can do it very linearly and scientifically. I'm going to experiment, do this here, do this here, do this here. There are generally in any audience that I speak to at least 1 or 2 people who hear the voices or receive information in one way or another. If they oftentimes very shy about this skill, and they've learned it's not the kind of thing you talk about, but if you can find someone who has these attributes, these are the kind of people you want to be very respectful towards and kind, and at some point, maybe even a little bit obsequious. Would you please help me? It goes a lot faster when you can talk to somebody who can talk to the plants. It's a lot easier. I remember giving this course in Massachusetts a long time ago, and the woman who's of the farm was the kind of person who could do this, and didn't let on. She called me up in the middle of the summer and said, I was walking through the eggplants, and they said they want lemonade. What should I do? I was like, well, it seems pretty easy to me. Give them lemonade. Really? Why? I'm like, you could ask them. They're the ones that told you. Why are you asking me? You think I know? I don't know nothing. I'm just some kid. And a man at that, right? You're the woman, you've got the intuition. You're the one they're speaking to. It's your farm. So what kind of lemonade? Ask them. Well, what could they possibly want? I don't know. I don't know. Giving you some real simple things like copper, like zinc, like manganese. But we've got homeopathy. People know about homeopathy, right? You know about homeopathy? The frequencies of in this. I mean, I was just saying. Who was I saying to at lunch? Like, I get this little sciatica thing sometimes when I work too hard and don't sleep enough. And my wife has these little sugar pills that she gives to me, and it's all gone. I don't know what's in the sugar pills. It's called homeopathy. I don't know which one it's called, but I can't, I've been laying in bed and I'm like, I can't move. And she gives me these little sugar pills and it goes away. And it's gone. Anybody who knows about homeopathy, I see no reason why you can't put homeopathic remedies in a spray bottle and spray it on your plants. If you know homeopathy, do you know Bach flower essences? Do you know essential oils? Do you have, we generally have all kinds of goodies in our lives that we've been trained in through other, history or we know about, et cetera, that we can use. And the list of ingredients is massive. There are all kinds of, flowers. There's herbs you can use. You can make teas with, dock or with chicory or with. You can take, tomato prunings and put them in a bucket of water and then, make a ferment and then water your tomato plants. There are so many things we can do with naturally occurring stuff, locally occurring stuff we've got in our back pockets, stuff we've got in our kitchen cabinet, stuff we've got in the medicine cabinet, that work, that absolutely work. We are, no longer in the recipe section here. We are in the, use whatever faculties you've got to develop your understanding and your experience and experiment and see if you can find people who are more intuitive than you are or more connected and be nice to them. And invite them over and ask them if they would go for a walk and help you learn and talk to your plants. I think, this is the most strategic way to do this whole process is to engage people who are more connected. I oftentimes refer to the conversation about the indigenous communities. The anthropologists, as an example, were down in the Amazon talking to the Amazonian tribes people and asked them how could you possibly have figured out that this root and this leaf are used to address this ailment. And they're like, plants told us, duh. How else would you figure it out? And the anthropologists or the scientific medical researchers sort of pat them on their primitive little heads and say, you silly people. But they get a report back from their colleagues in Australia that they were talking to the Aborigines and they got the same exact answer. And that's curious, until they get another report from their colleagues in Central Africa who were talking to the Maasai, and they got the same answer from the Maasai also. And there's another report coming from the Inuit, and another report coming from the Swiss, mountaineer people, and all of a sudden we've got reports, data points, if you're a scientist, data points from all across the planet that are all agreeing with each other, all saying the plants told us. And our culture says plants can't tell us. We can't talk to plants. Like I say, if you're a scientist, if you believe in science, the principles of science, and you've got 15 data points, and 14 data points are on a line, and one data point is an outlier, what do you do with the data point that's an outlier?
They're not even on a line. They're on the same.
They're in the same spot. Sorry, yes. It's not even a line. It's exactly the same spot on this quadrant, and the other one's over here. 14 agree, 1 disagrees. What do you do with the one that disagrees? You chuck it, right? If you're a scientist, if you believe in science, when one data point disagrees with the rest of the data points, that's the outlier, that's the mistake, that's the screw up. Something's wrong with that one. When our culture says it's not possible and all the rest of them say it is, maybe we're wrong. What's that? What are they smoking? Is that what you said?
Oh, yeah, no.
Whatever they're on, I want some of that. They all found it? In Australia? Up in Alaska?
If it's any comfort, there are a lot of older Christian hymns that speak of this very thing. All nature sings and round me rings the wonders of the spheres.
Categorically. I'll get to the science of it in a minute. We have good Western scientists who are agreeing with this, right? Our formal published literature agrees with this. And yet what we are taught in school and what our media, sort of conveys is is an entirely false perspective. Anyway, I continue. I'll attempt to continue.